Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 8.3 Demonology Warlock DPS guide. In it, we're going to be covering Azerite Traits, Essences, Talents, Builds, Rotations, Corrupted Gear, and a few other things I'm sure along the way. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you're interested in any weak auras or add-ons you've seen here, I'll place the link to my Twitch, probably below my camera right here actually, where I stream 5 to 6 days a week, all of my guild's Hall of Fame progress and things like that, if you want to hop over there and grab them for free as well. Now, before we get too far into the guide here, I do want to mention that this is video 2 of 3 in a series covering Destruction, Demonology, and Affliction for Warlocks heading into 8.3 and Ny'alotha in general. If you want to check out the Destruction guide, I put that out a few days ago on the channel, and the Affliction guide should be coming out a few days after this one's actually released as well. So if you want to check back later, feel free to do so, or if you want to be notified, feel free to smash the sub button below, and I'll let you know when the Affliction guide goes live. Okay, now let's start off by talking single target talents for Demonology Warlocks, mainly in raiding. In the 15 row, we had the option of Dreadlash, Demonic Strength, or Bilescorch Bombers, and most of the time, the choice everybody makes is Demonic Strength here for single target fights. It's a 1-minute CD that costs no soul shards, unlike Bilescorch Bombers, that infuses your Felguard with Demonic Strength and commands it to charge your target and unleash a violent Fellstorm that will deal 400% increased damage. The fact that this is a 1-minute CD means it lines up very well with every single Tyrant you cast if you're running BOP Major or Minor, which you should be, and the fact that it doesn't cost soul shards makes it even better. It makes it an easier, more fluent spell ability you have in your extra rotation. There are certain times where people have taken Bilescorch Bombers, fights like Mythic Zakul or frequent answer spawning or Gazoa, things like that. Bilescorch Bombers does gain value, but Demonic Strength is pretty much the de facto go-to single target talent in this row. In the 30 row, we have the option of Demonic Calling, Power Siphon, or Doom, and the choice you make pretty much every time is Demonic Calling. It's a passive and says Shadowbolt and Demon Bolt have a 20% chance to make your next call Dreadstalkers cost 1 less soul shard and have no cast time. This means essentially because your Dreadstalkers have 20-second CD, pretty much every time or most of the time that you cast your Dreadstalkers, it's going to be instant cast and cost 1 less soul shard. You cast a decent bit of Shadow Bolts and Demon Bolts over the course of your rotation, building shards and dumping them through Hand of Gul'dans and things. It procs a very good bit of the time. Power Siphon and Doom, unfortunately, are a bit undertuned at this point. There was some niche scenarios where you played with Doom before, but it was mainly on ad cheese fights like Gahoon and things like that. Demonic Calling is a choice you make in the 30 row for single target Demonology traits. The 45 row, we have Demon Skin, Burning Rush, Dark Pact. Burning Rush you can make pretty good use out of in the vast majority, pretty much every fight, single target raid wise. Having the extra movement speed is really, really strong. It lets you move out of abilities faster, react to incoming abilities, whether they're planned or unplanned mechanics. It's very strong. If I don't take Burning Rush in this row, the majority of the time, I take Dark Pact. It's good on fights like Mythic Ashvane, Mythic Queen's Court, where there's a certain point in the fight where you want a shorter CD that has like an absorb or just some way to counteract a large burst of damage coming at you. Demon Skin sort of does that, but unless it's a fight you're taking constant damage on, you're still going to have a bit of Soul Leech around regardless. And the fact that you actually have Dark Pact on a 1-minute CD makes it a very, very valuable target or talent in certain scenarios. In the 60 row, we have From the Shadows, Soul Strike, and Summon Vile Fiend. The choice you're going to make here running the Demonic Consumption build, which we'll get to in a little bit here, is Soul Strike. Technically, Summon Vile Fiend does sim a tiny bit higher, but Soul Strike gives you more mobility. The spec has become much more fluent. It's just the choice you want to make here for a lot of reasons running the Demonic Consumption build. In the 75 row, we have Dark Fury, Mortal Coil, or Demonic Circle. The choice I make here basically every time, barring a really, really niche fight scenario, is Demonic Circle. You're very hard-pressed to find a fight when it comes to raiding that you cannot make good use of Demonic Circle on. It is very, very strong, and even though Demonology is, I guess, technically the second most mobile spec out of all Warlock specs, you can still make great use out of Demonic Circle, whether it's cheesing abilities or just getting extra movement out of the way. You know, it's a very, very, very worthwhile talent in this row. The 90 row, we have Soul Conduit, Inner Demons, or Grimoire Felguard. The choice you want to make here, running Demonic Consumption, and just most of the time anyway, single target wise, is Soul Conduit. There is some merit to Grimoire Felguard with very few and far between outlying kill times on fights. You can get a bit of extra value out of Felguard versus Soul Conduit. There are arguments sort of pulling you in that direction at times, but honestly, with how well Soul Conduit plays with Demonic Consumption in conjunction with Demonic Meteor pieces and just actual like Memory of Lucid Dreams Minor, the fact of the matter is between those actual effects, you have a chance to get refunded so many soul shards. There are times when you're casting Hand of Gul'dan called Dreadstalkers off a Demonic Calling proc that you actually build shards. You actually build shards. Essentially, you get so many refunded to you off of a Hand of Gul'dan cast, off of Dreadstalkers cast, and Soul Conduit has a lot to do with that. And the 100 row here, we have the option of Sacrifice Souls, Demonic Consumption, or another portal. The choice you make here, single target wise, is Demonic Consumption. Sac Souls undertuned. Nether Portal is not technically like a terrible choice, but Demonic Consumption is powerful. It's a better option. And even though Nether Portal is also awesome, it requires you to stand still for 15 seconds. And the rotation, once again, while it's awesome, it's a bit complicated, a bit of a headache. Demonic Consumption is a very, very, very strong talent we have here. It gives Demonology a damage profile of having a large amount of burst damage roughly every minute, as long as you're playing VOP Major or VOP Minor, which you should be to some extent in your actual build here. It's fueled through Soul Conduit, Demonic Meteor, Lucid Dreams, and just Shard Refines in general. It's a very, very, very strong talent. So this is the choice you make here in the 100 row as far as single target talents go. Now, as far as Mythic Plus talents go for Demonology, sort of similar to how Destra was here, there's not a whole lot that really changes here. In the 15 row, you have the option, once again, Dreadlash, Demonic Strength, or Bilescorch Bombers. For a while, I played with Bilescorch Bombers in Mythic Plus. The main difference being between Demonic Strength, it's a 30-second CD that costs 2 Soul Shards versus a 1-minute CD that costs nothing and is essentially bound to your Felguard. A lot of people say it's personal preference. I think it pretty much is personal preference. Playing VOP Minor builds, things like that, you can save your Demonic Strength for your Tyrant cast, or if you're playing a VOP Major build and you proc a Tyrant, you can get that extra value there by casting your Demonic Strength while that Tyrant's active. Bilescorch Bombers has the downside of being a placed ground effect, similar to how Rain of Fire is. So if you have a tank who's kiting or moving a lot, or on a Raging Week, something like that, bolstering where you're kiting a lot, you're probably going to lose a lot of value playing Bilescorch Bombers. The upside is the CD is half as long as Demonic Strength, but with Demonic Strength, it's actually tied to your Felguard, which essentially means, hey, if the tank's pulling the mobs across the room, your Felguard is going to follow the mobs. It's going to hit the mobs regardless. There's positives and negatives to both. Recently, I've actually tried Demonic Strength, well, probably over the last 2 months or so, with a VOP Minor build as far as Demonology goes. VOP Major mostly, actually, and Plus. And I feel at this point that Demonic Strength, personally for me, and I feel overall, is the better choice here. But it's still really close, and I would not fault you for taking Bombers here if you wanted it. It's technically personal preference, so it's that close. 30 row, once again, Demonic Calling, Power Siphon, or Doom. Demonic Calling gains even more value here. Well, essentially, it's the same. But, I mean, you're in Mythic Plus. It has a bit of action. There's more movement most of the time in Mythic Plus. Trash packs, bosses, everything else. Demonic Calling does give you that extra ability you can cast on the move. As well as having Demon Bolt procs. You have called Dreadstalkers procs every 20 seconds or so. Soul Strike you can cast on the move as well. Obviously, you can implode, but it adds a bit of extra mobility to your toolkit. Unfortunately, Doom takes way too long to take and deal damage in Mythic Plus, and Power Siphon's not where you want to be. 45 row, Demon Skin, Burning Rush, Dark Pact. Similar to how rating is, the majority of the time I'll take Burning Rush or Dark Pact technically. I probably lean a bit more towards taking Dark Pact in hierarchies on Tyrannical 4 to 5 weeks, 17, 18, 20 range, right around there, when you want that 1-minute CD for that extra survivability. Seeing as how you have Soul Link is Demonology, you're pretty tanky regardless, but this gives you even more leeway with certain mechanics like the first boss in Temple of Sethraliss or the final boss of Toldagor that has some pretty hard hitting abilities back to back to back potentially. Those are Dark Pack fights. You want that there. Burning Rush gives you that mobility, obviously. You know, Mythic Plus, a lot of mobility, but you have to weigh your options here and really decide what you want heading into the higher key range, you know. So, in the 60 row, from the Shadows, Vile Fiend, Soul Strike. Soul Strike, similar to how Demonic Calling is, gains even more value here. You still play it in a single target build, like in raiding and such, but in Mythic Plus, once again, it gives you a bit more mobility on the move. The one soul shot it grants you on use is really nice, and it plays very well with the consumption build, which is really strong in Plus as well. 75 row, I play Circle, single target wise. In Mythic Plus, though, Mortal Coil and Dark Fury, I think, are the options you want to play here. I know they are. Mortal Coil is a 45-second CD fear, in a sense, a sort of pseudo-heal for yourself. You can interrupt certain things. Cast a decent bit in Motherload, as well as fear in general, to interrupt certain things that aren't really interruptible unless you actually interrupt them with a stun or a fear. Dark Fury also reduces the cooldown of your Shadow Fury, so that's useful in itself as well. It depends. What the choice I make depends on the week a good bit, and the dungeon I take as well. most of the time, I'll be honest, I forget to swap from Demonic Circle. And to be fair, you can get value with Circle. And plus, there are a lot of fights you can cheese mechanics on, things like that. But I think overall, as far as utility goes, which we are lacking in Mythic Plus, Mortal Coil and Dark Fury are your better options here. 90 Row Soul Conduit, Inner Demons, Felguard. Your Felguard's on a 2-minute CD. Grimoire Felguard here, that is. There have been people who really advocate playing Grimoire Felguard in Mythic Plus over Soul Conduit. If your tank pulls around your Felguard CD and things, if you can line up big pulls essentially every 2 minutes with your Felguard. The interesting thing here is that there are proponents of that strategy. However, Soul Conduit at the same time, I feel, as well as most of the community, provides more smoothing. As mentioned before, it plays very well with amount of consumption, more soul shards, more Hand of Gul'dan casts, more imps, bigger implosions. It's not just single target in Mythic Plus. Trash is a very important part of Mythic Plus. I personally feel Soul Conduit is the play here. Inner Demons is under tune and just not worthwhile. So technically, if you want to try and experiment with the Felguard build, you can, but the vast majority of the player base, I believe, feels very strong that Soul Conduit is where you want to be, myself included there. Alright, now as far as the 100 row goes for Demonology Mythic Plus, your options technically, once again, are Sack Souls, Nether Portal, and Demonic Consumption. The choice you make here every time is Demonic Consumption. You're never going to find 15 seconds that you can stand still in Mythic Plus to cast your portal. And even if you find like 10-ish seconds, you're not going to be able to optimize your portal rotation. Sack Souls, even though it is a passive and just increases Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt damage based off your actual amount of imps you have active, demons you have active technically, sorry. Demonic Consumption is where you want to be. Whether you're playing VOP Major or Minor, you should be playing one version of Mythic Plus, and typically I feel Major is what you want to play, which we'll get to in a little while here. It essentially gives you a 1-minute damage profile. I believe it's your timer's on a minute 12 CD right now, an 8.2.5, and an 8.3 when we get our neck to higher levels. I believe it's around 1 minute and 6 seconds or so. It gives you that 1 minute single target big damage burst profile in your Tyrant. Seeing as how we're also running one Baleful Invocation trait, which once again we'll talk about more in a little bit here. Casting your Tyrant refunds you 5 shards, and that means you can fuel Hand of Gul'dan right in the Dreadstalkers, or typically 2 hands, because you should get like at least 1 shard. You find that to you playing Soul Conduit, Meteor, Lucid Dreams, everything else. Once your Tyrant expires, you obviously get if you're playing a Supreme Commander trait, you also get 1 instant cast Demon Bolt refunded to you, as well as the massive intellect buff you get whenever your Tyrant expires. So you can carry that over into larger implosions, just more single target damage depending on what you're pulling, if it's a trash pack or a boss. It's a very, very, very strong CD, and one that gives Demonology an advantage in Mythic Plus, which we need because we're lacking in the utility department. When it comes to Demonology's Azerite traits, there's really only one that's mandatory at 1 stack, but certain ones gain a tremendous amount of value depending on builds and what you're actually doing. Baleful Invocation is the one trait that Demonology basically requires, as it refunds a full 5 soul shards to you whenever you summon your Demonic Tyrant. It also buffs each of your Tyrant's Demon Fire cast, and when paired with the Demonic Consumption talent, things really get crazy. If you're running the Vision of Perfection Major build of Demonology and proc a VOP base Tyrant, you are refunded 3 shards due to Baleful Invocation instead of 5. This does essentially affect the way we play the spec rotationally, mainly playing around potential VOP procs shard-wise whenever possible. Supreme Commander is another trait that's tied to your Demonic Tyrant, and is also affected by VOP Major procs. When your Tyrant expires, Supreme Commander grants you 1 Demonic Core stack in addition to a large intellect buff for a whole 15 seconds. VOP-based Tyrants also grant the intellect buff upon expiration, but only for 1/3 of the int value. The actual full Supreme Commander intellect buff and the VOP proc buff are independent of one another, meaning you can technically have each buff rolling at the same time. VOP-based Supreme buffs will indeed refresh the duration of previous VOP buffs if it's active, but they do not stack nor extend past the baseline 15-second duration. The Demonic Meteor Azerite trait is very powerful at 1 stack, both single target-wise and AoE-wise. It buffs the baseline damage of your Hand of Gul'dan and gives you a 5% chance per soul shard spent on hand cast to be refunded. Seeing as how Hand of Gul'dan makes up a large portion of our Mythic Plus trash damage, the extra damage here is really nice. Extra shard refunds essentially fuel more hand cast, more imps, and things of the sort. This trait also fuels larger Tyrants when playing the Demonic Consumption build of Demonology, as long as RNG and refunds are really on your side. The Explosive Potential Azerite trait brings with it a maintenance buff you need to refresh every 15 seconds. Whenever you cast Implosion with 3 or more imps, you gain a haste buff that lasts for 15 seconds. EP is a single target DPS gain at 2 or more stacks and is used single target at times, but most of its value is in Mythic Plus. It provides roughly a 25% or so passive haste increase, depending on eye level and certain other things. While it's active, and seeing as how we implode frequently in Mythic Plus, it's very easy to maintain. If you have 2 or more EP pieces mixed into your single target set, you can simply implode every 12 or so seconds to refresh the buff before it falls. Heart of Darkness is the new 8.3 raid Azerite trait, and is also a solid option if you have 25 or more equipped corruption on your character. It's important to note that it does not increase value-wise at further corruption levels, so there's no merit in wearing extra corruption for more stats. Most of Demonology's single target builds consist of 3 Baleful Invocation traits, 1 Demonic Meteor, and 1 to 2 Supreme Commander or other stat-based traits like Heart of Darkness, depending on availability. Supreme Commander does bring a higher potential upside, but also has a lot of RNG with it as well when playing Vision of Perfection builds. In Mythic Plus's Demonology, you want to look to acquire 3 Explosive Potential traits, 1 Baleful Invocation, and 1 Demonic Meteor trait. The 6th and final trait can be a stat-based trait, a floater kind of trait in a sense. A second Baleful trait maybe for Tyrannical weeks, or a second Meteor trait for Fortified weeks are solid options. When talking about essences for Demonology, the build that is played in Mythic Plus and mostly in 8.3 when we receive the Condensed Life Force nerfs revolves around Vision and Perfection as your major essence. I will say that there's an extreme amount of RNG tied into this build with how it interacts with both Baleful Invocation as well as Supreme Commander, but the damage it can produce with the right procs at the right time is truly insane. If you're able to proc a VOP-based Tyrant in your player-bound Tyrant setup, which we'll cover in a bit here, it both freezes the energy of your active imps as well as generates you 3 soul shards, which can then be used to fuel another hand of cooldown or 2 before casting your player-bound Tyrant. When the VOP-based Tyrant expires, it also grants you the Supreme Commander intellect buff, which further buffs the damage of your main Tyrant when it's casting. This is the RNG you're really looking for when playing VOP Demo. Random Tyrant procs outside of that are nice too, but most of your damage will be dealt in that player-bound Tyrant window. Minor essences within the VOP major build normally consist of Focusing Iris Miner and Memory of Lucid Dreams. In 8.3, however, at 75 neck level, we are receiving a 4th minor essence slot, which means that other essences like Breath of the Dying, Conflict and Strife, and Crucible of Flame, to name a few, will begin working their way into VOP Demo. Breath of the Dying gains a lot of value in execute range, while rivaling Crucible of Flame's baseline damage before it, without CLF's RNG. Conflict is a flat damage increase and damage taken reduction, which is more so what I look to run in AoE-based settings / Mythic Plus, so they all have merit in a sense. If you're looking for a more consistent build of Demonology, Condensed Life Force as a major is technically still an option, but as I mentioned, it's being nerfed in 8.3. With the CLF major build, your minor essences typically consist of Lucid Dreams, Focusing Iris, and at times Vision of Perfection for the cooldown reduction it brings to your Tyrant. If you're able to squeeze in an extra Tyrant depending on kill time on the boss, then VOP Minor gains a lot of value. You typically will sync your first Tyrant and third Tyrant with your Condensed Life Force usage, which greatly increases both you and your Tyrant's damage. Other minor options for this build are Crucible of Flame, Breath of the Dying, and Conflict and Strife mostly if you aren't running VOP as your 4th minor for an extra Tyrant. Rotationally, running the VOP major build of Demonology, you'll want to open on pre-casting a Demon Bolt at 4 seconds before you pull the boss, followed by casting Called Dreadstalkers. You will then want to build back to 5 shards by casting Shadow Bolt, which will depend on your shard refunds, and then cast Hand of Gul'dan, Soul Strike, Hand of Gul'dan, and then your Demonic Tyrant. I do want to note that if you have a few extra shards remaining after your second Hand of Gul'dan cast here, you can cast an extra hand or 2 essentially to dump those imps into your Tyrant as well. Keep in mind that the imps actually have to spawn from the Hand of Gul'dan visual effect before you finish your Tyrant cast to be consumed by it, so you'll want to delay your Tyrant cast after the final hand by a half a second or so to give them time. Right after your Tyrant cast, pop Berserking and Demonic Strength if you're running it. If you have a stat-based on-use trinket, now is also the time to pop it. Outside of that, maintain the 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan / Dreadstalker cycle until your Tyrant's almost off cooldown again. Once you have about 8 or so seconds remaining on your Tyrant cooldown, you can begin prepping for the larger Tyrant by building the 5 shards and casting Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand, Demon Bolt, Hand, and 1 more hand if you have any remaining shards, then Demonic Tyrant. I want to note here that these Demon Bolts will all be instant cast when setting up your Tyrant, which you can guarantee by simply casting your Called Dreadstalkers on cooldown. Whenever your Dreadstalkers expire, they have a 100% chance to give you 2 Demonic Core stacks, which are instant cast Demon Bolts. Outside of that, you again resume the normal build and spend rotation of Demonology. Be sure to keep in mind when playing the VOP version of Demonology that Tyrant procs can happen at any time and will bring 3 shards with them as long as you're playing Baleful Invocation. If you have the option of casting a Shadow Bolt to build 3 shards from 2 instead of casting an instant cast Demon Bolt, it's typically better to cast a Shadow Bolt and then Hand to try and leverage VOP procs. This changes a bit in Mythic Plus when setting up Implosions, but single target wise, it's much easier to leverage. If you're playing the condensed Life Force major build of Demonology, the opener really does not change a whole lot. You still start off with the precast Demon Bolt, but after that, instantly pop your condensed Life Force CD. You then cast Call Dreadstalkers and build the 5 shards with Shadow Bolt. Once you're at 5, you cast Hand, Soul Strike, Hand, with the potential of an extra hand or two depending on Soul Shards, into your Demonic Tyrant. Cast your Berserking again here if you're a Troll, and Demonic Strength as well once your Tyrant's active. This opener ensures you have the max CLF haste buff for your Tyrant when he spawns, as well as full coverage. You will want to set up your second Tyrant the same way as we mentioned previously, with a minimum 3 hands, just like the VOP major build does. Seeing as how CLF is a 3-minute CD, you will typically have it for your third Tyrant, so be sure to pop it before you begin the Tyrant setup there. Outside of that, just maintain the same build / spend rotation that Demonology has. For the Explosive Potential opener, you want to start by precasting a Demon Bolt right into a Hand of Gul'dan. At this point, cast Soul Strike, Shadow Bolt, and then Implosion to get your EP buff active. You want to then cast Call Dreadstalkers, and then build the 5 shards via Shadow Bolt, and cast Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt or Soul Strike, Hand of Gul'dan, and then Hand of Gul'dan again if there are any remaining Soul Shards, right into Summon Demonic Tyrant. This should put you back to 5 shards thanks to Baleful Invocation, in which you want to immediately cast Hand of Gul'dan, a filler spell, and then Implode to refresh your Explosive Potential buff. Outside of that, it's mainly about casting Call Dreadstalkers when it's off CD, and casting 3 shard Hand of Gul'dans. The Implosion Rotation is something that I get a lot of questions about, both on stream as well as in Discord, so I felt that it would be a good idea to cover it here. You effectively want to implode with either 2 or 3 sets of imps, which depends on your actual procs. If you don't have any actual Demonic Core procs, you want to build the 5 shards, cast Hand of Gul'dan, then either Soul Strike or Shadow Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan once more, Shadow Bolt, and then implode. Casting the final Shadow Bolt allows time for your imps to spawn from the second hand, as they are not instant. If you have 2 or more Demonic Core procs, you would then build the 5 shards and cast Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, followed by 1 final Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt, and then Implosion. This is the 3-wave Hand of Gul'dan cycle that we mentioned. Now, as far as corruption goes for Demonology, I want to start off by saying that we're still a few days away from 8.3's launch, and these sims are done with my own character's profile and PTR. Blizzard is still actively tuning PTR, and we've seen changes to both corruption and gear in Ny'alotha itself within the last 2 days, although most of these revolve around the damage-based corruption effects. Without further ado, here are the results of the corruption sims that I ran for Triple Baleful Demonology. Honed Mind, Racing Pulse, and Surging Vitality are at the top of the sims here, but keep in mind you have to actually take damage to proc Surging Vitality itself. Racing Pulse is pretty close to Honed Mind in sims, with my character sitting at roughly 20% haste self-buffed. The good thing about both these traits being strong for us is that it makes acquiring stronger effects much easier in the long run. Now obviously you want to run your own sims using raid bots in your own character when 8.3 goes live, but I felt this would be a good template to reference before the patch hits. Once things settle down and corruption is tuned a bit more, I will most likely release a video updating corruption effects for each spec in a few weeks as well. As far as pets go, your Felguard should pretty much always be the pet you use. He deals more damage than any other pet you have as Demonology, but the downside is that he does not bring with him an actual interrupt. If your group really needs one for a specific fight or encounter, then swapping to the Fel Hunter is an option, but you will lose out on a bit of damage as well as the functionality of the Soul Strike talent if chosen. The fact of the matter is that Demonology is still RNG based in 8.3, playing Vision to Perfection as your major. It does not bring that consistent damage like Destruction or Affliction does to fights whether they're single target or AoE cleave, Havoc based-esque fights in general. The one thing that Demonology does bring, well, it brings multiple things, but the biggest thing I feel that Demonology brings to these fights, and certain fights where you want to play it on, is its strong 1-minute burst damage profile. It's a very, very, very strong spec for stacked multi-target cleave, where you can get Hand of Gul'dan cleave, Implosion value, Bioscorch Bombers, Demonic Strength, and just your 1-minute Tyrant if there's like small mini bosses or mini adds that need to be killed, similar to how Zakul was in its final phase. Like, Demonology Warlocks could go down in both like actual end Delirium realms and handle both those adds. So Demonology's damage profile is very strong in a lot of niche-based scenarios. I do feel there's a high potential we play Demonology on 1 to 2, maybe 3 fights in Ny'alotha, which I'll be covering next week in our raid guide coming out. So if you want to see that, feel free to smash the sub button below. Once again, I also want to mention that Destruction Guide has already been released. This is the demo guide, and it will be releasing the Affliction Guide hopefully over the next few days as well. So if you want to see that, feel free to check back in a few days, guys. Thanks again for everything. I appreciate it, and I'll see you on stream. Peace.